Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we dive into the reference-based pricing portion for this education hour, just wanted to thank all of you for investing your time with us today and talk a little bit about the Starr Group and why we put this education hour together. So this is actually the first of 4 scheduled webinars that we have coming up over the summer time, that really what we wanted to do was provide a look to our clients and prospects and partners of what is possible in regards to group benefits. For those of you who know us, you know that at the Starr Group, we pride ourselves in being a disruptor in the group healthcare market. And what we really look to do is get away from pushing the easy button. So many consultants out there, or brokers, shop year to year and don't really provide proactive solutions to group benefits. They may look at tweaking your deductibles here and there, but year over year, you still see increases. And at the Starr Group, we really want to provide solutions to risk management, gain control of your healthcare, group healthcare again. And there's a lot out there that people don't realize you can do. One of these things being reference-based pricing, a solution that we're seeing great savings when we run analysis for our prospects and clients, and really being a solution that can help you take control. So Dan and myself, along with the Starr Group, and we partnered with AMPS to bring you this first education hour. And we have a few others scheduled. So we have one coming up July 15th. That's going to be with Scout RX. We also have one July 29th where we're partnering with US Health Center. And then August 12th where we'll look at HPS. But today we're really excited to have Scott Fuqua here to go through this and provide you some insight into reference-based pricing and what you can do with it. Scott, you can take it away.
Great. Thanks a lot, you guys. I appreciate the opportunity to talk today. And just like Ashley was saying, one of the biggest problems in healthcare today, as many of you on the phone may struggle with every year, is lack of control, lack of insight, lack of understanding where these costs are at, why they keep increasing, those types of things. And RBP is really what I would describe as the purest form of price transparency available today in the marketplace. Using the power of self-funding and then using an RBP strategy versus a traditional program backed by a PPO is going to allow you to have complete insight into your program, complete insight into claims, where all the dollars are really at. That's the majority of the cost of your health plan is claims. Admin fees and things like stop loss premiums, those are about 15% of your cost, where 85% of your cost is going to be claims. You need insight into those claims in order to deploy strategies to help keep those claims in check so that you can keep more funds within your organization to help you and your employees. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And on the screen is an agenda to give you an idea of where we're going today. We're going to spend some time talking about the problem. We've got a problem here in the United States regarding our healthcare system and how it operates. And I'm going to give a little bit of insight into that. And then we're going to talk about the solution, which includes this reference-based reimbursement, reference-based pricing. Some people call it PPO replacement. Whatever vernacular you want to use is really a flagship product of AMPS. But one of our core services is something that we call physician-led medical bill review, which is another key component to the solution of many of the problems that are driving costs in the healthcare marketplace today. So we're going to talk about those two pieces. Physician-led medical bill review is actually built into our reference-based pricing program here at AMPS. And I'll talk about the importance of those two things as we move along here. Then there's a number of different options that you can deploy in terms of design when it comes to our reference-based reimbursement. From a really aggressive option to more of a sort of put a toe in the water type of option. So we'll briefly give you guys a look into that. I'll show you a savings analysis example of a group, 84 life group that we did up in Wisconsin. We're going to talk about our performance statistics, not only nationwide, but also in Wisconsin, a little bit about member education, and we're hopefully going to have some time here for some Q&A at the end. All your microphones are muted. We've got a big group on the phone today, but there's a Q&A section on Zoom. Please feel free to type in some questions if you have them as we're going through the presentation here, and then at the end we can address them one at a time. We're going to try to leave some time at the end for that. So again, I appreciate everybody being on the phone today, and let's get moving here. So a little bit about AMPS. We've been around almost 17 years now, a little over 16 years, and the whole goal of AMPS, the why behind AMPS, is we're simply trying to create a fair system. It doesn't exist today. In terms of the original or the traditional models that people deploy today, it's excessively fair to the provider and really unfair to the employer and employee. AMPS wants to develop a marketplace for you as the employer and your employees that is fair all the way around, which also means fair to the provider. For those of you that have heard about reference-based pricing, sometimes it gets a negative tone to it that this is an attempt to gouge providers. Absolutely not. In fact, as you see on the screen, AMPS becomes a co-fiduciary to your plan. Any of the major carriers that we would call the BUCAs, the Blues, United, Cigna, Aetna, Humana, if you're working with any of them, ask them that question if they would be a co-fiduciary to the plan. I'll tell you right now, the answer to that question is going to be no, they will not. AMPS requires it. It's very important. Hopefully you would view it important. We want to take that role, that risk and responsibility right along with you. It gives us some discretionary authority in order to deal with these claims and keep the costs down, and I can explain some of that as we go along. But again, the goal of RBP is to create a fair system and to provide transparency into a marketplace where transparency doesn't exist. We describe ourselves as physician-led and technology-driven. Technology, data is key to creating and offering and deploying an effective RBP solution. It is about data. We need good data in order to determine what we think is fair to a provider and what we think that provider is going to accept as fair. But the physician-led component is a component of our medical bill review. I'll talk about that in detail in a moment, but that medical bill review step, which essentially is looking at errors on claims, is built into our reference-based reimbursement program. So it's a component within it. It's very important. It's not an extra fee. It's just what we do on a daily basis as a core function of AMPS. I also want to let you know, reference-based pricing has been around for about 12 years, a little bit more. AMPS has actually been doing a form of reference-based pricing since we started almost 17 years ago. But I want to let you know that it is growing. It is a decent sized segment of the marketplace today. It's expected to triple in size in the next 24 months. We've got about 3 million lives running it today across the country, just with AMPS, and about 1,300 groups. So this is a proven, successful solution that we're talking about here today. But let's kind of start with the problem here in U.S. healthcare system today. It's a mess, as you guys know. Costs and prices are out of control. And I like Warren Buffett, some of his comments that he made, geez, upwards of maybe 8-10 years ago. Things like, you run a healthcare business whether you like it or not. And all of you on the phone that have, your second largest expense is this healthcare expense line that you're also struggling to find ways to even manage it and get information to even manage it. It's been an issue for a very long time. And things like Starbucks spending more money on healthcare than they do on the coffee beans that they buy to sell as their main product, that's a problem. That's a statement that shouldn't exist in the marketplace today, but it does. And when you look at how healthcare prices and costs have exploded over the last decade plus and compare that to wage increases, we're going backwards. I may get a 3% wage increase in a given year, but because of the increase in the healthcare costs for the employer and myself coming up at my renewal, I now am getting a higher cost share, more out of my pocket, maybe more in copays and deductibles, a combination thereof, which just ate up my 3% raise. So we're actually going backwards in this country. 75% of bankruptcies, personal bankruptcies in the United States are healthcare related. But what's really interesting about that statistic is 75% of the 75% have health insurance, and they still can't afford their portion of those prices. Again, should not be the case. So over the last decade plus, what have employers been doing? The strategy has continued to be use a PPO network, try to develop consumerism through high deductible plans, and these huge increases in premium costs. The majority of it has been pushed down to employees in the form of higher cost shares, high deductible plans, things of that nature. The problem with that is you can't be a consumer without the right expertise and without the right tools. You can't be a consumer in the healthcare marketplace today. You can't find prices, you can't find quality. So when you look at high deductible plans and how they've performed over the last 10 years or so, the reports are showing that maybe in some cases they're showing some savings. When you look at where those savings are coming from, it's because people are avoiding care because they can't afford it, which is problematic because now you have a ticking time bomb with employees that should be getting smaller services taken care of, and they're not, and those are going to blow up into higher cost medical services. So this is what we call the cost shifting game. Who is going to pay these costs? As the employer, I can't take on the costs, so I'm going to make you pay more. Or let's get the spouses off the plan if they've got the opportunity to get healthcare through their other employer, things of that nature. That's just pushing the money around. What's not been happening, unless you're in a reference-based pricing program, is none of these traditional models attack the cost of the claims, which is what is driving these increases. So what is the other reasons why healthcare is so expensive? I mentioned it a moment ago. People don't ask for price. They don't ask because just for some reason, that's the way this industry works. You don't ever ask your doctor a question, let alone what they're going to charge you for that day. But even if you're the type of person like me who's going to ask that question, you're lucky to get an answer. Usually the answer to that question is, who's your insurance? Well, I didn't ask you who my insurance or about my insurance. I asked you what the price was. If you, there was actually an article in Time Magazine about 10, 12 years ago called The Bitter Pill. And that gentleman ran around the country and met with a bunch of hospital systems and asked all the administrators, where do you come up with your prices? He never got an answer. No one could tell him where the prices come from. They're actually just made up numbers. So hospitals, providers had the ability in this country to create their own prices, bill whatever they want. And due to COVID-19, if you've been reading in the papers, and we've been seeing it in the data, prices coming out of providers, hospital systems, facilities in this country have gone up in the last couple months, okay? But what's interesting is their cost to do business hasn't gone up, and I'll talk to you about that here in a moment. Most assume there's no choice other than, again, the BUCAs. That's a term that we use in the industry to kind of describe the industry as a whole and how it, and who created it, and essentially the problems behind it. So that's Blues, United, Cigna, Aetna, Humana. A lot of people think those are my choices and I'll play the game every year and I'll have them bid against each other. But again, you're kind of putting a Band-Aid on a problem because your costs over time are still continuing to go up. We've got a fee-for-service industry here in this country. So the more utilization there is, the more I can bill. So I don't know how many times you guys have run into this situation. You go see the doctor because you think you got the flu. They give you some antibiotics. You're going to feel better in about 5 days. 7 days later, you feel fine. But the doctor still needs and wants you to come in a couple of weeks for a checkup. Why is that? Because if you don't come in, they can't bill you and they can't make any money. So this fee-for-service industry is also helping drive those costs. There's limited interest in resources to make financial decisions. Those are those tools I talked about that AMPS can provide to your members to help become a better consumer. And then there's another thing that happened not too long after the Affordable Health Care Act called the medical loss ratio, which was actually presented as an attempt to save money, But a lot of folks like myself in the industry knew that that was going to backfire, because what the medical loss ratio essentially says is that depending on the size of the group, on a small group, an insurance company has to spend 80 cents out of every dollar on claims. And if it's a larger group, 85 cents out of every dollar on claims. The problem is when you look at that and you're talking about organizations that are multi-billion-dollar organizations, publicly traded, things of that nature, they don't like the fact that somebody's trying to cap their profits. So their piece of pie is now only so big, 80 to 85%, or actually 20 to 15% is my margin. Well, if you look at that and you realize, well, my piece of pie can't get any bigger, so how can I increase profits? What am I going to do about that? Well, the only way to increase the size of my pie is to increase the size of the entire pie. So this is another misaligned incentive solution that was put in place that actually is backfiring and is leading to a rigged system, again, against employers and employees. A model like this, where carriers that benefit when costs go up, is completely opposite of what you want and expected from groups like that to help you keep your costs and these prices in check. So a cornerstone of the health plan since the 80s is a PPO. Reference-based pricing removes that piece. So that's something that many people have a hard time understanding, is how do I have a health plan without a PPO? If I don't have a PPO, then you want to talk about costs running out of control. Here they come, because I'm not going to get my discount off these prices that are coming out of these providers. Well, years ago when a PPO first started, it did make sense. Providers billed about 15 to 20% margin on top of their cost for their services. It was very transparent. That's the way they billed. And somebody came up with the idea of, if I can grab a bunch of people and drive them into your facility, would you give me a discount off your prices, which are a 15 to 20% margin? And of course, we'll do that. That was a great idea. But now, especially with the huge increase in self-funding and employer-sponsored health plans, the definition of a PPO and how it interacts within that is now completely different. You now have two organizations. You have a provider and a network carrier that hold a contract that you can't see. It's proprietary. And that contract determines what you're going to pay for services. And both those two entities that hold that contract benefit when the costs go up, not when they go down. So similar to the MLR rule, when you start to look at a PPO and the way it's derived, this top-down approach of a provider can bill whatever they want, then I'm going to put a discount on it, leaving me still with a gigantic number. What's the value of that when you start to peel back that onion? And what 1,300 or almost 3,000 employers for AMP that work with AMPs, and many others that we're working with today and that we'll be working with tomorrow, have realized that same thing. The value of the PPO has really gone away. In fact, it's actually a negative value. It's helping drive your costs up. So a couple other reasons why healthcare is so expensive. I mentioned it a minute ago. A PPO model is a top-down approach. Bill me whatever number you want. I'll put a discount on it, and then the employer and the member will pay that number. But if that starting number is 10 times what it costs that provider to do that service, then after your discount, you're still left paying a massive margin, 200, 300, 400% margins on the cost that facility incurred in order to do that surgery, for example. What reference-based pricing does is it looks at these transparent numbers from a bottom-up approach. What does it cost you, Mr. Facility, to do that knee surgery? Another transparent benchmark is Medicare. Medicare's rates are set to give a facility about a 6 to 8% profit. Many organizations and businesses in this country survive, grow, hire tons of people, help a lot of families, at a 3, 4, 5% profit. So even from a Medicare perspective, that's a nice profit. But if you're billing 7, 8, 900% of what Medicare would pay you for that same service, then your PPO is giving you a 30, 40, 45% discount off that number, leaving you with a 400 or 500% of Medicare reimbursement to that facility. Again, what is the value of that discount? It isn't one. That is a huge margin that an organization doesn't need, that a provider doesn't need. The other interesting thing, and I wish we were doing this in person because I love to see faces when I talk about this component. When you're using the PPO network, I don't know if anybody knows, but one thing that you give up when you do that is the right to audit and review those claims for accuracy before you pay them. It's an amazing thing. It's like getting a credit card statement in the mail for $5,000 from Amex, calling Amex and saying there's no detail on here, so how do I know if all these charges are real, if they're accurate? And they tell you, well, you just trust us because we give you the best APR of any credit card company out there. That's the PPO model. You absolutely cannot look at claims for errors. Billing and coding in healthcare is incredibly complicated. There's millions of what we call procedure codes. There's thousands of what we call diagnosis codes. There's things called revenue codes. There's things called DRG codes, et cetera, et cetera. Very complicated. Also, providers bill things when they're ordered, not when they're rendered. So many times you'll have something ordered for somebody who's in a hospital. The physicians decide maybe we shouldn't do that. Let's do something different for this person. But they don't take that original ordered service off the bill. It stays on there. So if you remove the PPO, not only are you getting out of the illusionary discount game, but you now have the right to audit claims. If you remember at one of those first slides, I mentioned AMP's core service is a physician-led medical bill review product. It's a standalone product, but it's built into reference-based pricing. So AMPS is going to audit every claim before we do anything else with it. We call it cleaning the claim, getting the errors off of it. We use board-certified physicians to help us do that, to look line by line by line. There's a couple reasons why that's important. Number one, claims are absolutely riddled with errors. AMPS has audited millions of claims in the near 17 years we've been doing business. How many of those claims have errors on them? About 88%, a little bit more than that actually. But it's not just AMPS. Medicare does audits every year on hospital claims. There's an organization called NCCI that does audits on medical claims every year. Even Equifax did a study of 40,000 hospital bills one year. They find even worse statistics that we do in some cases. Some of these reports have come out with 90, 95, as much as 97% of their sampling had errors on those claims. So if you're using a PPO, not only are you getting the fake discount game going on, but you're also paying on line items and charges that should be reimbursed at zero and taken off of that claim. Because there's a process issue in healthcare. Claims come in many times to administrators who are going to pay those claims for you, and we call it auto adjudication. Nobody touches it. It's automatic. They check to see if the person is eligible on the plan. They look at whatever number was billed by that hospital. They put that discount on it, and in 3 days, they cut a check. Even the claims that hospitals send in for payment have really no information on them, and I'm going to show you one of those in just a moment. So that process issue in healthcare is also driving up the cost. There's no due diligence being done on these claims. You're having blank checks written to these providers. There's no transparency going on. And also, just so that, and we'll do this as a follow-up too with some other articles, but I would suggest that you look at the book called Head in the Bed, or you go to this website with Dr. Josh Luke. He used to be a CFO and CEO in many hospital systems, but he got out of that business, is now running around the country talking about the types of problems that I'm talking about with you today. So if you don't believe what I'm saying today, read it directly from somebody who's been behind the scenes within these hospital systems and has seen this stuff going on. It's really pretty scary, to be honest with you. So this process issue in healthcare, facilities and hospitals bill off something called a universal bill. It's like the cliff notes of a book. There's really no detail there. It gives you an idea of what happened and it gives you the prices, but that's about it. The detail is in the itemized bill and in the medical chart notes. So when you go to a reference-based pricing program like AMPS and you get rid of those networks and those restraints that come along with it, then we now have the ability, and the TPA does, to request this information on every claim so that claim can be audited first. So what kind of errors are we finding in this auditing function? They're all over the place, guys. They're everything from human errors. I went to put in $1,000 and instead I keyed in 10,000. Putting in people the night before a surgery into the hospital, that's called a hoteling day. There's no clinical need for that. They just want to hit you with another night stay and a room charge. Duplicate billing, services never rendered but on the bill. A lot of coding games. There's things that we call unbundling of codes, upcoding. For example, if somebody's in an ICU and I code it as a level 4 severity versus a more accurate level 3, as a facility, I might get $10,000 more on that claim. That's how important that coding is, and that's why this function is so important, to look at those first and get those errors off the claim and get those corrected before we do anything else with the bill. And this is an example of a UB04. That's what the industry calls it. Every facility and hospital in this country bills off a form that looks like this. It's standardized. These things over here are those revenue codes that I mentioned before. They're just big category type codes that don't have a lot of detail in them. This bill came from Temple University Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as what we call a test claim. I'll mention this again at the end of the presentation, but we can do things like this to help prove out this concept. Give me a large claim from last year, we'll audit it, we'll reprice it using reference-based pricing, show you what you should have paid versus what you did. That's what this was. This was a test claim that was given to us. It's $323,000 this facility billed Temple University Hospital. And as you can see, there's not even a third of a page of information on here. And I'm going to pick on one line here for a moment. It might be hard to see for you, but there's a laboratory line here, 322 units of lab for almost $158,000. Well, just looking at that line alone, are 150 of these 322 units of lab duplicate charges? Are 50 of those units lab work that was done on this person that has nothing to do with their diagnosis? You're just racking up the bill on me? I have no idea. But 98% of all claims get paid off of a form that looks like this. It hits the system, nobody looks at it, they put the discount on it and cut a check right away. I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather have my claims administrator and whoever's working on my health plan pay accurately versus fast. And why do they pay fast? They got to keep the provider happy. Why do they got to keep the provider happy? Because if I'm a PPO, Blue Cross, United, whatever, my network is my product. My network is my client. Unfortunately, the employer is not my client. So when we got this bill, we requested the itemized statement. It's not a third of a page. It was 21 pages long, 21. What you're seeing at the top of this slide is the bottom of our line-by-line review using our physicians where we look for errors and those types of things. And down at the bottom is just a couple examples. This here, this first set of purple boxes is what we call unbundling of codes. This is an intubation tube. Maybe you've seen that on TV. You put it down the person's throat if they're unconscious, and then they're intubated and they can breathe. It comes in one package, but there's a tube and a stylet within that single package. Hospitals buy these things for like $12 or $15, guys. They broke it up into two pieces and billed them separately. You're not allowed to do that. And also look at the charges. The tube is billed at $102. The stylet is billed at $114. Combined, that hospital spent maybe $12 on this. So right off the bat, that is an error. That's unbundling of codes. You can't do that. So if somebody's using AMPS just for the medical bill review product alone, I can help those clients with these types of things. The problem is I'm only getting you part way there, because if you look at the other example that we found on this claim, this isn't an error, but it's a One heck of an example of excessive charges. This is an acetaminophen tablet down at the bottom of the screen. That's not an error. They gave the person the Tylenol, but they billed that Tylenol at $386.10. So if you're using a PPO network for that Tylenol, you're going to spend probably $200 or more once the discount is applied to this charge for a Tylenol. You could buy a truckload of Tylenol for $200. Here's some other examples of the type of charges we see literally daily. These are not 4 charges that we pulled out of claims over the last 17 years just to give you shock value. We see this every single day. In fact, the oral cleansing vise or a $1,000 plastic toothbrush from a hospital, and I don't know if anybody's ever been in a hospital before and got a toothbrush. Hospital toothbrushes are more like a half a toothbrush. This ended up on the news a handful of years ago. It went through a newspaper up into the national news about the $1,000 toothbrush. But we also have seen a mucus recovery system. Interesting way to describe a box of Kleenex and give it a little bit more oomph to try to justify the $75 charge for that box of Kleenex. Or we found an acetaminophen tablet for over $500, a blow-up pillow for $450. This is what's happening. Why are providers billing like this? Because they can. No one says you can only bill up to a certain amount. They can bill whatever amount they want. In fact, before I'd mentioned in Wisconsin, we see providers billing 6, 7, 800% of Medicare. In some instances, for certain types of treatment like infusion therapy in a hospital, we've seen as much as 15,000% of what Medicare would pay that facility for that exact same service is the bill going out the door. So what's 40% off 15,000% of what Medicare would pay them for the same service? Right? There's no value there. Here's a little bit more data to kind of hit this home. This is 1,600 hospitals, over 10,000 claims. This is AMPS data. And again, we're very rich with data. We've been doing this for a long time, and it's really important. So as you can see, this line here is the billed charge line. So what this is showing is across these 1,600 hospitals, and this ends in 2017. So this line is more like up in this area now in 2020. This is their billed charge line as a percentage of Medicare. So providers are billing on average 700% of what Medicare would pay them. And as a reminder, Medicare is about a 6 to 8% profit. That line right there is the Medicare reimbursement line. Okay? This right here is what did those employers pay after their PPO discount. So after PPO discount, I'm still paying 300% of what Medicare would pay for that same service, which is probably 325% of the provider's cost. And also, don't forget, you have a bunch of errors that are on these claims between these two lines that you're not allowed to look at. But hey, you're getting a 40% discount on those errors, right? This line here is right around 148, 146% of Medicare. This is on average what AMPS pays providers across the country. It changes on each individual claim, but on average, that's about what we reimburse. A nice profit to the provider, obviously big savings to you since you're paying up here, and also removing the errors so that there's a diligence being done on your claim so that you can protect your plan assets. And as you can see, the result of that is a flat trajectory from year to year versus the 8, 10, 12% average increase that most employers are seeing on an annual basis. And if that keeps up, and that's the type of average you're seeing, then in the next 8, 9, 10 years, your costs are going to double just like they did over the last 8+ years. So the question to you is, can you sustain a doubling of your health care expense in that amount of time? And if the answer is no, which I'm assuming it is, you got to get off the train that you're on because that's what it's taking you to. That traditional model is going to continue to drive those types of increases. So PPO replacement, reference-based reimbursement, get rid of the middleman. Get rid of that network that is not allowing you to protect your assets, driving those costs up. Let AMPS create a fair program and a fair reimbursement to the provider, which is going to drive big savings to you. We're going to use things like cost. What does it cost the hospital to do that surgery? We have that data. We buy that data. Medicare. What does Medicare pay for that same service? That's another really good benchmark in healthcare to help determine, okay, if we know the cost and we know Medicare and we've gotten all the errors off, let's put a nice margin on top of that to that provider because we want to pay them fairly and we want to give them a nice profit. If I need a surgery, I need a good surgeon to go to. This isn't about gouging providers. And that's how we're going to drastically cut your prices, drastically cut your costs, and give you insight to your health plan so that you can actually manage this on a go forward. Here's a quick example of just one claim. Let's say XYZ medical procedure is billed using this top-down PPO discount model approach. The Medicare allowed rate for that service that's being billed is $1,000, which means the cost to do that service, that provider, is probably around $920. But again, the provider can bill whatever they want. So they bill $8,000 for this service. Well, your valuable PPO discount comes in and applies its reduction of $3,200. So you're only going to pay $4,800. On the surface, this sounds great. This looks great. Thank God I got a PPO, or else I would have paid $8,000, which is unbelievable. I only paid $4,800. It's still a lot of money, but thank God I had my PPO. But when you back it into these transparent numbers, wow, that's 4.8 times what Medicare would pay that provider for that same service. So that same claim that was billed at $8,000 comes through the AMPS program after we audit it and then reprice it with a nice margin on top of Medicare. That reimbursement's going to be around $1,500, not $4,800, which is a 31% difference below the PPO. Not below the billed charge, but actually below the PPO, or $3,300 in savings just in this one example. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're talking about, breaking it down this way. And this would occur across all your claims. So the message here today, guys, unlike maybe what you thought, or unfortunately maybe by other advisors or folks in this industry, maybe you're under the impression you can't really manage healthcare. Some employers tell me, Scott, I've been told it's an unmanageable cost. It just goes up. So I've got to, shop it around every year. I got to push down more to my employees. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In fact, AMPS on the low end of its average is going to save you about 20%. So let's look at that financially and how that backs into an organization from an EBITDA, from an earnings perspective. Now, this is an example using 500 employees, which on average would have a top line of maybe $50 million. If I cut your cost by 20%, your medical cost by 20%, that's equivalent from an EBITDA perspective to a 40% increase in sales. How many of you get a 40% top line increase in sales year over year? I would imagine very few. But if I can work with you along with the Starr Group and some of our great TPAs and get you that 20% off, it's equivalent from an EBITDA perspective of the 40% increase in sales. So an interesting way to look at it. So get into a little bit of detail here. I know that we're getting close on time, so I want to kind of get moving. Again, AMPS is going to use multiple data elements in order to determine what's fair with a provider. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details here. We, hopefully in some subsequent discussions, and this gives you guys enough interest to give Ashley and Dan a call and maybe take a deeper dive. We would love to do that with you. But the point of this slide is just to tell you that AMPS uses tons of data to determine what's fair. Not just cost, not just Medicare, our history, fee for service, a lot of different aspects. And the result of that is consistent, strong, deliverable performance over 17 years, okay? But also, AMPS has a component of its program that we call the front end piece, and it's called care navigation. So one component of a very comprehensive, forward-thinking, next-generation RBP plan like AMPS is this care navigation function. how can we work with your members and provide tools to get them to the right provider to begin with? And what does that mean? Well, we have history. Again, we've been doing this for a very long time. We're going to know the providers in the market that don't like a reference-based reimbursement payment and others that accept it all day long. That's helping somebody find a friendly provider. We also know of a lot of providers out there that are very high quality, that do a really great job, are very efficient, and therefore can be happy with 140% of Medicare reimbursement. When that happens, AMPS contracts with those people. So mainly across the country of ambulatory surgery centers for non-emergency surgeries like knees, hips, backs, colonoscopies, hernias, things like that, where your member has some time to get this thing planned, or really high dollar diagnostic tests like MRIs and CAT scans. We've got contracts with providers like that. So within this plan, members have the ability to contact AMPS and help get steered to the right provider to begin with. Because one potential challenge with reference-based pricing, and some of you may have read about this, is something called a balance bill. You might be thinking in your head, Scott, you're telling me that providers in Wisconsin are, after PPO discount, are getting paid 300, 400, 500% of Medicare. Yep. And you're going to come in and pay them 150% of Medicare. Yep, on average. Well, why would they accept that? Aren't they going to sue everybody? Aren't they going to go after all my members? Aren't they going to want that money? Balance bills, that's what they're called. And yes, that is going to happen. Does it happen to the degree that you think it might? Absolutely not. Because providers are getting paid fairly. They are getting paid a nice margin. We know how these providers work in terms of their finance departments when those checks come up. Hey, I got paid quickly. This is a fair market reimbursement. I could try to complain about this, but I've got 60% of the people in my facility are Medicare patients where I'm getting paid 100% of Medicare. I just got paid 150% of Medicare. And oh, and by the way, they found all these errors on my claim, which I don't know, they could call that fraud if they wanted to. That's how it's looked at most of the time. But yes, are there going to be balance bills? There are. Those are going to go to the members. We help educate your members before you move forward with a plan like this. We know that these balance bills are going to take place, so we have a division within our company that we call member advocacy. It's a very proactive approach, and it's there to protect you and your members if somebody ever gets a balance bill. We get between the member and the facility and defend what we did, defend the plan, explain to the provider, and make that go away. We negotiate with the provider if we have to, etc. And again, we would love to go into this in a little bit more detail with you to make you comfortable with this, but I do want to also make another point. In a traditional model with PPOs, these balance bills have a name for them in the traditional model. They're called a surprise medical bill. And in fact, I read an article just yesterday that these continue to grow and grow and grow. And what's a surprise medical bill in a PPO world is I go to a hospital to get services, but for some reason, the ER room is not part of the PPO because they're an outsourced group hired by the hospital. The anesthesiologist that was part of my surgery, that's an outsourced group too, and they're not a part of the PPO. So 1 in 5 inpatient surgeries, 1 in 5 outpatient surgeries now, several other examples are resulting in a surprise medical bill. So balance bills are happening today in the traditional model. Members are just left on their own to deal with it. In some cases, here comes the situation where somebody has to file for bankruptcy because sometimes these balance bills out of these ER rooms can be huge. Under an AMPS plan, if you get one of these surprise balance bills, you have advocates, you have attorneys, you have experts like coders and doctors, etc., to defend that member. You're not left on your own. And actually, that happened to me a handful of years ago on a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan where my anesthesiologist on my knee surgery was out of network and I was under a traditional plan and I was left to deal with that on my own. So I wanted to point that out. I had mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of different ways to deploy this strategy, from a very aggressive, we're going to do reference-based pricing on every single claim. There's a hybrid model that we recommend and that a lot of our groups, in fact, most of our groups run this middle model called a hybrid model, where you're using a physician-only network along with AMPS. And again, these are things that we can talk about in more detail after today. There's something new, depending on the size of the group, called a dual option, where a PPO will run alongside AMPS reference-based reimbursement. What's really interesting about that, guys, is that just happened about 2 months ago. Cigna announced that they would do that. What I want to point out to you today, without going into the details of this, is that is yet another signal in this industry that this PPO model has got a shelf life. Why is Cigna saying we'll work alongside a reference-based pricing model now under this dual option? Because otherwise they're going to get cut out completely. Because otherwise, if you go to reference-based reimbursement, you're not using Cigna at all. So most importantly for today, I just wanted to point that out, because again, it's another signal in this industry that tells me, and should tell you, that this traditional model has got problems. And if you think that Cigna and Aetna and Humana and those other folks don't see that and realize that people have peeled back that onion and realize that that's a problematic model, this is another signal of that. Them buying Walgreens and working with PBMs and things like that are other signals that these guys are trying to find different revenue streams, because this PPO model is completely broken. One other little toe in the water would be just to use this reference-based reimbursement model just on your out-of-network claims. That's a good way just to kind of put your toe in the water, start to get some data, start to see how this can really work, learn how it works. But obviously, you're going to get very little savings out of this. You're going to get the greatest savings out of this, and these are somewhere in the middle. So we can talk about that. That's a great follow-up for Dan and Ashley if you want to reach out to them. And I'm going to leave you with a couple really good questions here to bring to your carriers if you're working with some carriers, because these are good demand pull questions. Get it out there. Ask them, what are you guys doing to audit my hospital bills? I want to see a report. I read these stories about claims are riddled with errors. I know the answer to that question. That answer is they're not doing it. But push them. Prove it to yourself. Tell me what the value is of your PPO discount, but don't tell me it's the best in Wisconsin. Don't tell me it's 40% off. That doesn't mean anything to me. Benchmark it to Medicare. What is your PPO discount as a percentage of Medicare? You're probably not going to get the answer to that question either, because that's going to be 300% plus. That's not a question that they really want to answer. And again, ask them if they want to be a fiduciary of the plan or if they are. You might get an answer to that question, and that's going to be, we don't do that. I had a group up in Wisconsin a couple years ago ask these questions of UHC. It took them 3 months to get an answer out of United Healthcare. And the answer was a 25-page document about disease management and wellness and all these other things. Nowhere in that document was the answer to these questions. As a result, that group is working with AMPS. So proof of concept, we can do test claims. We can get data from you, so we can give you an idea of last year, if you were with AMPS, this is what you would have saved, this is what you would have paid. If you can get some detail on some high dollar claims, a couple big hospital claims, I can show you specifically on that claim alone what you would have paid versus what you did, that type of thing. So you can work with Dan and Ashley to learn from them to find out what kind of data that we need to gather in order to do this for you. And here's an example of what we're seeing. This is an 84 life group in Wisconsin. We got that data. We looked at last year's claims over 12 months. What did we find? Right in the middle of our average, about 30% net savings, meaning net of AMPS fees to run this program, is what we feel they overpaid, which was $461,000. If you're an 84 employee plan or employer, what could you do with an additional $461,000? That's what we're talking about. Retain these funds in your organization for your employees, not to give to these providers who don't need that excessive reimbursement. This will give you an example in Wisconsin of what's going on. These are the balanced bill rates here. Providers like in Milwaukee, Waukesha, and this big market area, bill on average 453% of Medicare, which means sometimes we're seeing as much as 700% out of some of these providers. We're paying those providers 153% of Medicare, and we're seeing huge acceptance rates, just a little bit of balance billing. And again, AMP's program works and protects your members if that's a balanced bill. They're not responsible for it, and we'll take care of it. But this is some more insight that we can provide in a proof of concept if you want to take a deeper dive and learn more about this. This is just a little bit about implementation. It's really pretty easy. Again, AMPS is going to be holding your hand. Our account managers are going to help educate you and your members on how this thing works, along with the team from the Starr Group. And then we just move forward. And again, we're kind of running out of time. But this is just some information on the implementation. And again, we can go into that a little bit more with you post this presentation today. Now, that was fast and furious. I know it. A lot of information being thrown at you. We are recording this. So Ashley and Dan will get back to you guys with some links. You're going to get some emails. If you want to watch this again, you want to share this with some colleagues, etc. And then again, I suggest that you please reach out to Ashley and Dan. I know that we would love to talk to you more about this and really show you how we can change the world for you when it comes to this problematic issue of healthcare expenses as probably your second largest expense. And I also see that we've got a couple questions here, but Dan, Ashley, you have some comments for us, and then we do have a couple questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do see the questions come in here. So I want to make sure we get time to follow up on that. But we do want to thank you all for coming as well. Scott will get these questions answered for you, but we can easily run a savings analysis. We've already been running it for some of our clients and prospects at the Starr Group. It's something that we work closely with AMPS. So I would say if anyone has interest on this call today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. The information required is some claims data that we can get, but it allows you to see the savings when it comes to your numbers. I know a lot of times you can see these things and think, okay, this might be too good to be true, but we want to make sure we can provide you these analysis. So it's something we work closely with AMPS on. So please reach out. But Scott, if you want to get those questions answered, I think that would be great.
Yeah, essentially both questions are speaking towards the same thing, and which is the cost to the employer. And then the follow-up question is, does it change when it comes to size, location, or other factors? It doesn't get affected by size unless you get to 1,000 employees or more. Then you start to get some discounts off our standard pricing. Pricing is offered in two different ways. There's variable pricing, a percentage of the billed charges from the claims. So depending on how much you're billed throughout the year, AMP's fee is going to be a percentage of that. But we also offer a per employee per month flat fee model. So it's really up to the employer. Some employers that feel that maybe they've got a younger group, or they feel that they've, their claims costs aren't too crazy, or especially in year one, they want to see what kind of savings this is really going to generate. So they would prefer the variable pricing. Others really like to see things on a flat fee type basis. So AMPS is very flexible when it comes to that. So when you get the flexibility on the pricing, along with the flexibility of the different ways you can deploy this from very aggressive to not aggressive, I got to tell you guys, as long as you're serious about doing something different in order to manage your costs, somewhere in there and all that flexibility is a solution that's going to fit you guys in terms of your risk tolerance, your need for savings, what your environment is like within your organization, etc. So we would love to learn more about you, and then those pieces, the pricing and some of the other things will fit in naturally.
One other question here, Scott, I see that came in, and you talked a little bit about it before in regards to what you're seeing in Wisconsin. But it does say here, they've heard from other consultants and brokers, and you mentioned, and I just want to see if you want to elaborate on it, that it just doesn't work in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's different than other markets. So what would be your final closing word on that?
That it does. I don't know what else to say. We've got a lot of groups up there, thousands of lives. We've got some groups up there that actually have been with AMPS going on 6 years. I don't think you renew something 6 times in a row if it's not working. But I will say, in Wisconsin, the balance bill rates compared to the rest of the country, or at least most of the rest of the country, is a little bit higher, no doubt about it. But we're managing those balance bills and still delivering a solid solution for employers. And then there's other things that we can do in markets that we really don't have time to talk about today. So it really determine on where the group is, what providers are being used mostly. Is there opportunities to contract with those providers? Again, some things that we could follow up with you on specific to your situation, where you're located, the type of providers you're working with, et cetera. But it does definitely work.
And I'm going to say something here. Tim Starr, CEO of the Starr Group, for those that are on, it has been our mission to be changing the way healthcare is delivered for years. It's taken us a while to get here. Thank goodness AMPS has been here for a long time. But I want to make something very clear. And that is that when you look at why others may be poo-pooing this, we really have to define and look at what it means to be a legacy benefits agency in the state of Wisconsin. And that's a follow the money trail, folks. I'm sorry to say it, but there is a huge, the implications of what's taking place in the state and why agencies might poo-poo this has everything to do with how long they've been in the benefits business and who the relationships are with. It is absolutely unequivocal. So I just want to make that very clear. At minimum, for those that are looking for something different, I would suggest that you look at alternatives. You have absolutely nothing to lose.
That's a great point, Tim, and I'll second that by saying AMPS is very broker and advisor driven. Really, the Starr Group is what I look at as my client, as an example, and I'm constantly searching for folks like the Starr Group, because to Tim's point, unfortunately, there are advisors and brokers in this country that will not talk about this, or if it's brought up, will say, you don't want to look at it, because they're not acting on your best interests. They're acting on their own best interests based upon the bonuses and a lot of additional revenue that doesn't even get reported on a 5500 form, that they're more interested in protecting versus doing what's right for the group. I run into it every day. In fact, sometimes if someone says, who's your biggest competitor? My answer is not some of the other folks in this industry that deploy an RBP solution. It's the captive broker. That's my biggest competitor. So I'm extremely excited to have met Tim and Ashley and Dan and the team up there. They're very forward thinking, and it's a group that cares about the employer. They know who their client is. So I'm glad that that actually came up, and Tim, I just wanted to put an emphasis on that for you.
Awesome, thank you. I think that should really wrap us up in closing. So again, we're here to answer any questions you have. We will be sending this out. This was recorded today, but again, looking for alternatives. That's what we're here for. We'll answer any questions, and thank you so much for joining us today.